Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this IPR webinar on a new IPR research report in partnership with New York Life on the communicator's role in driving generative AI adoption. We are thrilled to have our Director of Research, Olivia Fajardo, here to discuss the key findings, and Paul Gennaro here from SVP and CCO at New York Life to discuss what they are doing internally at New York Life in this field. So I have a few housekeeping notes to just mention before we get started. This is being recorded and it will be sent to you via email. It'll be on our website and YouTube channel as well for playback. And then if you have any tech difficulties, just message myself or any IPR staff member. And then we will also so I'm just forgetting the last one. Oh, sorry. We have Q&A throughout, and we'll use the chat and Q&A function to facilitate questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to engage in the chat. And with that, I'll hand it over to Olivia to get things started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brittany, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you all today to share our new research report in partnership with New York Life. So thank you to Paul Gennaro and his team for their support and sponsorship of this research. We studied, as Brittany mentioned, the role of the communicator in leading generative AI. So before we get into the research findings, which I'll share with you all, we want to know from you all, what has your exposure been to generative AI thus far in your workplace? So if you don't mind just sharing with us in the chat, how have you interacted with generative AI thus far in work? And have you? If you haven't, that's okay. There's no wrong answer. So we're just curious. We have all different levels of organizational development when it comes to generative AI transformation represented in the study. And we're curious to know where you all are to see what resonates. So please do, if you're interested in sharing, go ahead and share in the chat, and we can give those all a look as we move through the report findings. So, how we conducted this research, we conducted written interviews of 30 communications leaders who had some sort of involvement in AI adoption within their organizations, or if they were at an agency, did some sort of client consulting regarding AI transformation. And we conducted these interviews from August through October of last year. And what we looked at was we asked each of these leaders questions about first the organization, which we'll get into right now, some of those findings. And then we also asked about the communications function specifically, to see sort of where use cases differed and how that played out. So I'll tell you first about organizational motivators for AI adoption, barriers and concerns regarding AI adoption, ways that we can overcome those barriers and concerns, and the role of the communicator in relation to other functions throughout the organization. So, our first finding was that overall organizations fall into three distinct maturity stages when it comes to AI adoption. The first of these is tactical adoption. So, in organizations that are currently applying AI in a tactical adoption stage, they're applying AI to isolated tasks like drafting or summarization. And they may also be using it for basic content or research use that may not apply across organizational functions. So, we're seeing this on more of an individual employee level. Next, we have our strategic implementation organizations, and these organizations deploy AI across multiple functions with clear workflows. And most of these organizations in this category described use cases across four or more categories. And I'll get into our different use case categories in a moment here. Third, and finally, we have our organizations who are at the transformational implementation stage of AI adoption. And in these organizations, they have AI embedded in across the enterprise, across many different processes, and they may also be implementing proprietary or custom solutions based on their needs. So, three maturity stages. These are all outlined in the report. but this was a pretty big finding. And I will highlight that there is no wrong stage to be in. We have organizations of all different sizes with all different sorts of resources. So there's no wrong answer. And there also are ways for organizations to move along this maturity model. And I will describe those in just one moment. Our next finding was that productivity tends to drive organization-wide adoption. Productivity stood out as a major driver for adoption across organizations. So 90% of communicators said that increased productivity was driving adoption at their organization, followed by innovation and insights and reporting. So I'll let you all sort of read down the list. This again is in the report, so if you don't get a chance to screenshot or take a picture, whatever you may need, this is listed in the report. And I will note that only 10% said that staffing cuts were a concern. I know this is typically a concern that we hear when we're talking to different workers about generative AI adoption. I will note that this sample was mostly leadership. They were toward the upper levels of the organization, so that could explain why they may not be, you know, as, you know, focused on staffing cuts. Let's see. So for organization-wide use cases, we have research insights and analysis. These organizations are using generative AI to summarize reports, streamline client research, and synthesize competitive analyses, create cultural and stakeholder insights for content creation and editing, and then for productivity and workflow. So structuring documents, summarizing meetings, and that sort of deal. I know I use it personally for a lot of productivity and workflow use cases, so that is fairly common. One example that we received from one of our wonderful contributors in our IPR Digital Media Research Center director, Sam Stark, she said that they've developed advanced prompt libraries and new workflows with agents, and they've created AI assisted workspaces like custom GPTs that elevate efficiency. So that's one example of how respondents are using productivity, using AI for productivity. Some other emerging use cases are for marketing, brand, and social. So, brand management, campaign ideation, for customer service. Some healthcare respondents said that they were using AI-enabled support in settings of care. We had several customer service bots that were being used through AI. And then some of our respondents were also using generative AI to improve their client offerings. So they were offering automations via different platforms like HubSpot, and using proprietary AI solutions for GEO consultancy, which is GEO we've heard so much about lately. And I know that's top of mind for a lot of communicators. Not only did we study what's driving generative AI adoption as a motivator, but we also wanted to know what sort of concerns or barriers communicators were running into. And we found that risk, accuracy, and ethics were top of mind as concerns. So the top barrier that communicators said um, was a barrier to generative AI use was that it's too risky. 37% said it's too risky. And I'll explain in a moment what those sort of risks were. We did ask for specifics here, so we can go ahead and dive in on that. 30% said that they had a lack of training provided by their organization. And then 27% said that they didn't have enough time to try out new tools, or AI wasn't comprehensive and needed to be supplemented with additional tools. And again, this will be in the report if anyone's interested in seeing the details. So, wow, the different risks and concerns. So, in the last slide, when I said too risky, what is that risk? What does that mean? Notably, 97% said inaccuracies or misinformation of the AI generated output. So, of course, as communicators, this makes sense, right? We're concerned about misinformation being in the output. Also, cybersecurity, 73% mentioned cybersecurity. 67% mentioned intellectual property infringement. So, who did the rights belong to when this AI output is being taken from who knows which sources online? regulatory compliance, 63%. We did have a good amount of respondents who worked in highly regulated industries. So we often hear from communicators in highly regulated industries and what does this mean, for different industries and how does this apply? So that did stand out as a concern with our sample. And again, a lot of different factors here. These will be in the report. And we tried to be very specific with these because we know that in a lot of conversations about generative AI use, we are wondering what sort of barriers are there. And that way we know how to overcome them. So that is the next point we will talk about in a moment. Our respondents acknowledge that we do have concerns about this, but they're pretty optimistic overall. So, Samantha Stark said the sophistication of concerns is evolving. Initially, we were wondering, will this hallucinate? Now it's how do we maintain our strategic thinking skills while using AI efficiently? And how do we ensure our brand voice stays authentic? These are healthier concerns that indicate maturing adoption. And then one of our respondents, who is Chief Comms and Public Affairs Officer at a healthcare medical school, said, although there is a long list of concerns, I know this is the direction we're all headed. So we need to embrace, learn, and experiment rather than ignore or not use generative AI. So we found that one way to implement generative AI and move through that maturity model that we saw earlier is through training, governance, and communication. These stood out as need areas where we could utilize these levers, as we call them, to handle different risks and challenges and move through maturity. So, number one here was to establish governance. Most organizations we studied were using AI governance or responsible AI frameworks. However, that does not exist in every organization. So, establishing governance is very important for this process. We recommend that policies should be reviewed regularly with IT and legal functions if your organization does have an IT and legal function. And then some organizations are explicitly involving legal and compliance to monitor regulatory trends and ensure policies are met. So, as these regulations are changing, whether it be from the government or somewhere else, there is some sort of party within the organization that is tasked specifically with monitoring those, making sure that organizational practices are compliant. And then number two, in order to handle risks and challenges, focus on enablement, not restriction. So, governance should include practical tools and guidance on how employees can use AI safely, the when and the how. And then organizations can provide tool mapping, examples, and clear guardrails that can emphasize safe and empowered use rather than restrictions or telling employees what they may not do. And we also recommend the use of centers of excellence or AI task forces among the workforce that mitigate risks across functions. I will talk a little bit more about these centers of excellence and AI task forces in a moment. These really emerged as a major tool when it comes to successful implementation and adoption. All right, so how do we evaluate, train, and upskill? We've said that this is a way that we can approach barriers and we can move through the maturity model. And number one is hands-on experimentation. So, active experimentation and providing safe spaces for employees to have access to these tools and train on them is key. And these sort of hands-on experimentation safe spaces may look like low stakes experiments, use cases, pilots of different tools, sandbox style exploration, et cetera, et cetera. One of our respondents said that they did an AI hackathon, they called it, which is a really fun way to encourage low stakes experimentation with new tools. And we also recommend that continuous learning should be embedded for some organizations and should be treated as sort of a constant integrated process. We've also found that peer learning accelerates adoption. So, this is where those champions, networks, centers of excellence, AI task forces that I mentioned a minute ago come into play. So, this peer to peer learning enhances knowledge sharing and practical application. Some organizations even establish these cross-functional work groups to model their AI use. We've also found that blended learning models are effective. So, internal programs can be supported by external learning opportunities like an external coach or a consultant, a master class, a lunch and learn, bringing in some sort of external expertise to help support internal programs. And then we also realize that some gaps in training still exist. So, some organizations still lack structured frameworks for training and evaluation. Some are sort of ad hoc rather than having a structure behind their trainings. And then it's recommended to have motivation and incentives for training rather than sort of enforcing it with negative reinforcement. So we call this the carrot, not the stick approach. So that is a good way to approach training with your workforce. We also saw this comment over and over. Most organizations emphasize the importance of what they called a human in the loop to ensure that AI generated content was reviewed, refined, and guided by people so that it was in line with brand voice and brand standards. So throughout, that's one way that we can both handle barriers and also just make sure that AI adoption is responsible. I'll pause there for one moment because now we're going to get into the communication function findings. Are there any questions in the chat about the organization-wide findings?
Hey, I have one question about an example for what the conflicts with my personal beliefs.
Oh, sure. Let me go back to that if I can. Let's see. Was that on here? Maybe back here. Conflicts with my personal beliefs. Yes. So, that was more of a question regarding attitude toward generative AI adoption as a whole. So, do you believe that generative AI is the way we should be moving? Um, is it sort of so that realm of personal belief rather than something like, religion? I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Let's see, I think we're good so far.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much. And if you do have any questions as I'm moving through this, it's going to be a lot of information, so please ask away. We do have details for all of this in the report, which we're thrilled to be launching tomorrow. So we will have a link live on the IPR website tomorrow for the report. All right. So, as far as the communications function goes, we found that communicators are emerging as strategic catalysts for this adoption in their organizations. So, what this means for us. The role of IT is primarily the owner of these AI initiatives. Of course, that makes sense, right? So they're in charge of building out the infrastructure, the tools, the security, and implementing it from a technical standpoint. But success for adoption comes with pairing these more technical functions with strategic functions. So here we are at the role of the communicators. So, communicators should act as strategic partners and almost translators or a bridge, sometimes we say, between more technical functions and the organization as a whole. So, commonly mentioned responsibilities for communications leaders in this adoption included leading change management, internal messaging, training, and defining appropriate use cases. So, we really are uniquely positioned here to serve as a strategic partner and catalyst for this adoption. The role of the C-suite also cannot be understated. C-suite involvement was a very key piece of making this adoption successful. For some of our respondents, AI was a CEO-led priority. For example, one organization in the study had a chief AI and data officer overseeing an 80,000 person AI workforce, which of course is a very, very large, high on the maturity model example of this. But No matter the size of the organization, the role of the C-suite is important to sort of spearhead this adoption. And the C-suite leaders should focus on governance, strategy, and workforce upskilling. And then here again, we have our centers of excellence and task forces, which emerged as an organization structure to drive adoption. So, generally, these centers of excellence and task forces are made up of sort of a tiger team of employees who have adopted this technology early and are proficient and have an interest in generative AI. So, these sort of teams of employees help share use cases and also explore, evaluate tools, and develop solutions to help drive adoption from almost a more grassroots approach within the organization. So, strategic leadership, of course, is one of our main roles as communicators. We shape and frame the organizational narrative around AI adoption, which stood out as a need-based area. So, this narrative is very important to help sort of employees understand the reason why generative AI is adoption is happening and how it can benefit them. The communicator should share progress and success stories aligned with business goals, help define and uphold ethical guidelines and governance for AI use within the organization. And some communications teams also lead innovation. However, others face limited inclusion or slower progress. So it is helpful when we are involved from the beginning and can kind of help be at the table, as they say, and have a say in innovation. But of course, that's not always the case. One of our respondents, Eugene Chan, said the communication function is crucial in our organization's AI journey as it facilitates transparency, promotes understanding, and fosters collaboration among stakeholders. So that pretty sums up pretty well our role as sort of the bridge between all of these different stakeholder groups. We also serve as a cross-functional collaborator. So we partner with data, HR, legal, finance, and tech teams to ensure alignment. And also, usually, communications has a seat in different steering groups to support enterprise-wide initiatives. We were also wondering from a communications function standpoint how use cases maybe differed from the organization as a whole or how they might be the same. So when it comes to internal communication, the primary use case was content creation and refinement. So communicators were using this technology to draft first versions of internal newsletters, scripts. They're using it to ensure consistent integrated narratives across both internal and external and refined content proofreading, all of that good stuff. We also had a secondary use case of workflow automation. So, some communicators are using this to automate their routine internal processes like meeting summaries, action item tracking, setting reminders, formatting document standardization. And some are creating custom AI tools for different workflow stages, like automating scopes of work using trained data. From the external communication standpoint, a primary use case again was content creation. So you'll see that's usually how this technology is being used. This is being used to draft press releases, op-eds, briefing documents, and social content. One organization developed a press release intake bot to create first drafts. So we're seeing a little bit more of these sort of standardized bots and tools. AI primarily supports drafting, but a human is in the loop, refining and finalizing messaging. So we're seeing that human in the loop kind of coming up here again. And then externally, secondary use case is for research and insights. So preparing for media interviews, synthesizing talking points, summarizing research and testing key messages for external audiences. And respondents said that this really enables them to move faster while maintaining strategic oversight. So we found that in the communications function, measurement frameworks were really lacking for this adoption, and cohesive narratives for transformation were actually pretty uncommon. So this is definitely an opportunity area for communicators to step in and take the lead when it comes to generative AI adoption. 35% said that they needed more resources for training and upskilling, whether that's hands-on learning, time and support, continuous upskilling. We can all use more time, right? We're all very busy, so that is understandable. 25% said that measurement was a resource that they needed that they didn't really have, so they need better tracking, better measurement for ROI of generative AI implementation. 25% said that they needed consultation from experts. So that's that piece we talked about earlier, where we're bringing in an external sort of party to help with the internal processes for upskilling, training, and that sort of thing. 20% access to tools and platforms, 20% strategic support from leadership, which we saw was extremely important. So, those are some of our resources. And from all of these findings, we put together an actionable checklist for best practices for organization-wide adoption. So these are the steps that no matter which part of the maturity model you're in, you can take these steps to really, optimally implement AI. So number one, build a strong learning culture. Offer structured training such as AI 101s, prompt engineering, tool-specific sessions, ongoing reskilling. Create fun, low stakes entry points like those AI hackathons I mentioned earlier to reduce anxiety and spark creativity. And combine formal learning with peer-based education, like those AI champions who share real use cases in a way that their peers probably can understand. So, number two, in that same vein, empower peer learning and find your champions within the organization. Identify your early adopters so that they can mentor their colleagues. Encourage internal communities of practice for sharing AI tips and insights, and celebrate success stories to build momentum and really get everybody, encouraged and ready to start experimenting with these tools. And then three, engage and model from the top. This is that C-suite involvement we talked about earlier. Involve leaders early in AI strategy and planning, not just IT. We don't want this to be siloed just to the technical functions within the organization. Executives should model AI use and share their experience to legitimize adoption and also inspire some confidence. This visible leadership support really can accelerate organization-wide adoption and participation. So looking ahead, we wanted to ask communicators, what are you excited for about this? What are we looking forward to? And what pieces of this are really, going to be a game changer? So first and foremost, communicators are excited about being more creative with improved storytelling. Um, a vice president at a large agency said, this can elevate creativity and storytelling by helping us generate fresh ideas, adapt content to different audiences, and refine messaging in real time. Martin Waxman, who's a member of our IPR Digital Media Research Center and who has been involved in the AI space for a long time at McMaster University, said, if we put humans and our abilities first and use AI to enhance our perspectives. So using AI for the sort of pieces of our job that don't need a human touch, the things that are sort of more tactical and repetitive, and then humans can, be left with time to sort of be creative and do and the part of the job that requires a human. And we can be even better at that. Also, of course, saving time and improving efficiency. We did see that productivity was a top driver. So this, of course, is in line with that. So free up time from repetitive drafting, monitoring, and reporting so communicators can focus more on strategy, creativity, like we mentioned on the previous slide, and relationship building. Improving efficiencies will increase results across the board, said Janine Savory's IPR Elevate member, who is at Next Tech Communications. And then Matt Oakley, who is involved in AI at Hotwire Global, said AI enables us to automate routine tasks, uncover patterns in the media and audience behavior, and craft smarter recommendations for clients. Allows our teams to spend less time on execution and more time driving strategic high impact counsel. We also see a lot of strategic benefits of AI. So, final thoughts. AI presents opportunities to make communications faster and more efficient, but its adoption must be balanced with the safeguarding of trust, accuracy, and reputation. Keeping that human in the loop is key. Communicators are uniquely suited to demonstrate AI's strategic impact on brand perception, stakeholder engagement, and business outcomes. This creates an opportunity for communications leaders to drive broader organizational AI strategy rather than simply implementing tools chosen by others. So we can be a strategic catalyst in this process. And then finally, remember, communicators bring value to our organizations that generative AI will never replicate. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And then Brittany, you and I can work through the Q&A. But before we address any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Gennaro so he can talk about what New York Life is doing in their organization. And then we're happy to both of us return to some questions.
Awesome. So I just want to say thank you again to IPR for the research and to everyone, all of the 30 people that contributed to it. What we just saw was a really comprehensive review of where organizations are with generative AI, the maturity stages, the drivers, the risks, and the emerging role of communications. I'd like to quickly just touch on three things. One, share how these findings align with what we're seeing in New York Life. Two, offer practical lessons from implementation, and then talk about what I believe this means for communication leaders. So we've got the benefit. We do have a CEO-led push on AI, and that's really benefited us. The research you shared, I mentioned it before, Olivia, it really matches what we're experiencing. The tactical, strategic, and transformational phases is exactly what we've experienced the last 18 months. Our goal has not been AI adoption for its own sake. It's been AI-enabled reinvention of the corporate communications function. And I think the research really highlights productivity as the primary driver, and that's what we saw. So we have the benefit of working with Samantha Stark since late 2024. So at Sam's urging, we did 4 AI-specific surveys during last year. And on the most recent one, we saw that 78% of our team members are able to take on 1 or more projects a week as a result of AI. 85% of the team says they're able to focus on more strategic work as a result of AI. And if you're doing those two things, you probably got happier folks. And we saw that 80% of our team is more engaged as a result of AI. And we think that's the real story. It's not just making the work faster, it's giving people, you mentioned back, time, it's giving focus, and it's giving that cognitive capacity. So like many organizations in the research, we started with the tools, and we're fortunate behind the firewall, we've got Copilot, we've got ChatGPT, we've got Claude Enterprise. We're also about to get Canva Pro, so that's been exciting. But the value is accelerating when we move beyond the tools to the workflows, to the priorities, to the decision making. We've got 5 AI Blue Sky initiatives. So you talked about the teams working together. These are self-directed teams led by members across our organization, focused on audience insight, crisis support, measurement, creative enablement, and integrated planning. So they're not just changing how we work, but also what we produce. So one finding that I thought really stood out, and we saw it as well, was that training and governance can actually lag adoption. So those are things that we're addressing specifically. We are updating every job description and role on our team. So we've got 70 members, roughly 70 members on the team. Next month, we're going to be rolling out updated job descriptions. Coming with that, we've got a dedicated training program during the course of 2026. That includes outside speakers and perspectives, including Sam Stark, because we're having 2 of those on a quarterly basis. You mentioned peer learning. When we surveyed our team and said, what would you like to see more of from a training standpoint? And you could pick more than one. 54% of team members said they wanted to hear from other members of our own team who built GPTs for leaders or different GPTs for press releases, specific tools. So we've got that in there as well. And then lastly, we're formalizing what we're calling the New York Life AECOM way for corporate communications. So when you do a press release or an org announcement or a communications plan or a script, do you use Claude or ChatGPT? What are the prompts? What are the documents we're uploading? How do we create an orientation for new members of the team that join as we move this forward? So we're focused on all of those things. As far as where we are and where we're going, I was at the Reagan AI Horizons conference last week, and they said, to each of the panelists, myself included, on a 1 to 10 scale, where do you think you are? And I said, I really think it's point in time type of a question. If you asked me in December, I'd say maybe an 8 or a 9, but in February, I feel more like a 5. And I don't mean that because we're lagging behind things, but things are just advancing so quickly. And we're going to see agentic really dominate, I think, this year. So I think we need to be humble as we look at this because we could be really good right now with AI and we get new releases tomorrow or new requirements for organization. So complacency, I really think, is something we've got to be mindful of. I was asked, what would be your 3 points that you would share with other communication leaders? I think number one, and the research showed this, we need to lead this personally, right? We need to model it. We need to be building things on our own. We need to experiment ourselves. Our teams are going to follow what our behavior is, not just what we say. And then that ties into if you're a leader of anyone, whether it's communicators, HR, legal, businesses, you have a responsibility to those people to be training them, to providing the tools and the expectation and the training for them to coexist in an AI world. This is the most transformational thing, at least in my corporate career, right? So I think it's important that we're focused on that. And then the last thing I'd say for leaders is we have a finite time window for our profession to master and coexist with AI. The moat protecting us is getting smaller each day. The choices we make in the next 12 to 24 months are going to determine whether we shape the future of the industry and our profession or someone else does. And I think they're coming. Whether it's consulting firms, whether it's new ways of doing things, companies trying to take away what we do. So our choice is either we let it happen or we master AI and we get out in front of that. I'll close with this. The research that you just shared, and I can't thank you again enough, it makes one thing clear. Communicators are not passengers in this transformation, right? We are uniquely positioned to translate complexity, uphold trust, and align technology with human judgment. The question isn't whether AI will change our function and our jobs. I believe it will. It absolutely will. The question is whether we're going to lead that change. So thank you again so much for the research. Look forward to questions anyone might have from us.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for your support again, making this research possible.
Thank you.
All right. So we have some questions in the chat. Let's see. So from Heather, is the 80,000 person AI workforce defined by employees who use AI daily, or how would the chief AI and data officer define this? Did the IT department get renamed? Heather, your comments making me laugh. So thank you. So from my understanding, of course, I'm not at this organization, but from my understanding of who this organization is and the answer sort of with more context, I believe they're referring to their entire workforce that is being asked by leadership to use AI and experiment with AI. So I would assume it's the former rather than the latter, employees who use AI daily. Thank you for your question. We also had a question from Suki in the chat. How much of the automation success truly depends on collaborating with other organizations or functions within a company? Um, so were there any questions specific to it? We did ask many questions about how the communications function as a role is being expected to work with this AI adoption and what their sort of responsibilities are in adoption organizationally, and also how are they interacting with different functions within the organization. And we asked, who are the most common functions you are interacting with when it comes to these matters. So, as far as how much of automation success truly depends on collaboration, from where we stand and what we saw in the research, this is really a key role to successful implementation because when when adoption is left to, or I guess I'll say innovation is left to these more technical functions in a silo, they can be creating, but communications and other functions that have more of a handle on employee comms and dealing with sort of the different stakeholders within the organization, if they're not clued in until, AI or IT is just launching this tool out, that can lead to, confusion or employees, maybe not knowing the best use cases for this or saying, how is this going to help me? So when it comes to the technical part of adoption. I'm sure, IT can handle that. That's definitely their expertise. But when it comes to organization-wide, truly best practices for adoption and making this work for your workforce, there does need to be cross collaboration with other functions like communications. Paul, I don't know if you have a perspective on this at an organization like New York Life. Do you have anything to add here?
I would just echo what you said. I think for us, the adoption, and one of the things that we did is we started to roll out our enterprise adoption. We reached out to the folks at Moderna, which had done an AI adoption broadly before we did, the folks at Christine Elliott over at Moody's. So we learned what other folks had done, and it is very collaborative and partner, right? So it's with partnering with HR, partnering with technology, tech data, and AI, and then trying to drive the adoption at an enterprise level across the board in a collaborative way.
Hmm. Thank you. We have a couple of questions for you in the chat, Paul. So Rachel asked, first she said, I love your energy around this, and I agree. I mean, it's very energizing, and we love seeing that sort of perspective on this change. So Rachel's curious about your perspective on individuals who are skeptical to implement AI or who choose not to, even though the agency is rolling it out as a tool.
Yeah, so I think it's natural for people to be that way, and we experienced exactly that it was frankly probably right around this time last year. So we said, how can we do some things that are fun? One of the things we did a lunch with everyone on the team. Everybody got a buddy, and your buddy, the conversation, it was all you had to do at lunch was share 3 to 5 things of the way you're using AI, both outside of work and in work. And we found that was really interesting, and that got some people engaged because I didn't know you could do that for vacation planning or for cooking or for whatever. And then we published a summary of that list. We still had some folks that were reluctant. Even we got the ChatGPT licenses, and we had folks that were choosing not to want to get the licenses. So this is where I leaned on Sam Stark, again, an advisor to IPR, and Sam came up with a really fun. We set up a training where everyone needed to bring their computer or their iPad, a device, and Sam came up with kind of a fictitious exercise, and you needed to either create a video, write a press release, write a song, an album cover. You could choose. But we came out of that meeting with 100% adoption, and kind of the folks that were reluctant to want to utilize the tools, the next week we're asking for access to ChatGPT and all of that. So I think part of it is just kind of sticking at, continuing to try to drive it. I thought the way you shared it, Olivia, the carrot approach, really trying to lead from a positive way. But then the other part is we've been quite candid and said, I see this as a blockbuster moment, right? So, and if for folks that don't know, Blockbuster is where you used to go to get videotapes to watch movies before Netflix became dominant and streaming did. And if we're not doing this, I think it does put people's jobs at risk. And we're not in a position to cut jobs here. We're not looking to do that. But it is going to affect the profession, I think, long term. So really encouraging people and creating a safe environment, making the tools available to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great answer, Paul. Thank you. And to go back to the research as well, so much of what Paul mentioned is reflected in our findings too, which just goes to show that New York Life is, ahead of the curve and doing some of these best practices. So when we talked about our checklist for overcoming some of the barriers and concerns in the workplace, one of those is peer-to-peer learning, which is what Paul was talking about, low stakes experimentation, encouraging employees to use it in a creative way. Like Paul had mentioned, how are you using this outside of work? And this also allows you to have sort of champions too. Like I'm sure some of those peers who were in that conversation might have been a little bit more open to generative AI adoption and use both in work and in their personal life. So through that peer-to-peer connection, those champions then are sort of training and helping to upskill and maybe lessen the skepticism for those on the team who may not be as open to this change. Thank you, Paul. We have another question from Trina. As we saw in the research, many comms leaders need more tools and budget. How does your organization get the tools it needs, specifically around the measurement area?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we did the math on it, and you say, all right, so if you've got 70 people, $20 a month, let's say roughly, and I think the enterprise negotiates better rates, but you take that and then do the math on that over 12 months. is it worth it? And we believe that it is. Now we're operating in a flat environment, so we're getting savings from some other areas, but we've been able to make those initial investments. We do believe that over time, and one of the things that we're doing on a quarterly basis, we're looking at our external spend, whether it's PR agencies, whether it's articles that Factivas and the Decisions of the world. We're looking at that and saying, are AI tools enabling us to bring any of that work in-house? Now, the answer so far is no, but we think that's going to change. We also think that these vendors, the Factivas and Decisions and the PR agencies, know this and are going to deliver superior value. So we think that's going to drive a lot of innovation. But I think it's absolutely essential to find a way to make the tools available to your folks, even if it means redirecting spend that was somewhere else. And then what I've also told members of the team, I can't think of a better investment in your own education. So as an example, we don't have Google Gemini beyond the firewall, but I got it on my own. Why? Because in November, December, they came out with so many new things. I said, I really need to be playing with this. Same with Grok. So I think there's a combination what the workplace provides, and then I think for individuals to say, I'm going to experiment with some of this on my own. It's going to improve my life from being able to do some things maybe efficiently, and it's going to keep me on the leading edge of these new trends.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. We have one other question. Actually, we have a couple more. So just working down the list in order of when they came in. So Karin asked, what is the most important thing you believe communicators need to do right now to better coexist and embrace AI? I'll let you start, Paul.
I think you've got to start using the tools. One of the folks that we've been fortunate to work with, so I always say there's a book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, who's a University of Pennsylvania professor. Highly recommend checking that out. One of the folks who worked with at New York Life is Connor Grennan, who's at NYU. And what he's talked about is that the AI utilization is not a technology thing as much as it is a behavior thing. You've got to change your behaviors, kind of force yourself to use the tools. And once you start to utilize that, it really does open up new possibilities. So I would say that's the number one thing. I think it's getting in there, forcing yourself to say, okay, I've got a good way to do a press release. I've been doing this for a long time, or an org announcement, or a communications plan. But maybe I put it in there and I ask it to come up with 5 provocative questions. So I think it really is kind of changing the behaviors and self-learning. Right. So going out and reading different things, checking things out, LinkedIn posts that are different cutting edge things, reading this report and talking to others in the profession. I'd say that is by far number one.
Absolutely. And I agree. I know that this is not, maybe like I don't have much to add here because Paul's answer is really great. But Karin, I do think that that is the right book. Thank you, Tina, for sending in the chat. I do think that this sort of eye toward experimentation and creativity, and giving your, you know, team, no matter where you are in the organization, an opportunity to experiment and be creative and in that vein upskill them. I do think that that is the most important call to action for communicators right now. As Paul stated earlier, can't agree more. So thank you for your question. We have, let's see, I'm scrolling to see what the other one. Suki asked in the chat, love the intentional and strategic focus on AI adoption, test and learn within your organization. I am curious, how do you think your peers are doing across industries? And can you also touch upon, well, I'll let you answer this first one, Paul. How do you think your peers are doing across industries? And then we'll get to the second part.
I think it varies, and I think the limitations tend to be what are their organizations allowing. A lot of the folks that I've talked to are kind of one tool shops. And what I mean is they've got Copilot, but they don't have other tools, or they've got Copilot and ChatGPT, maybe. The folks that have more are able to lean in more. So I think it does vary pretty widely. I think it's important that we in this profession share best practices, learn from each other. I think it's just so important. That's why this research, I think, is so important. And I think what's going to happen over the course of this year, it's only going to accelerate. CEOs are going to go to conferences with other CEOs. They're going to come back. They're going to say to their head of communication, hey, how come you're not doing this? And a communications is going to say, well, because procurement or technology or whatever isn't making it available. And I think you're going to see that kind of that tension will be healthy, and I think hopefully drive more adoption.
Absolutely. And then Suki's second part of her question is about one of the critical resource gaps that we saw in the research, which was measurement. She's wondering, what investments are you making and how are you integrating AI into these frameworks for measurement?
Yep. So one of the blue sky initiatives we've got is called Metrics Plus. And we did an exercise with our entire team. We said, all right, what would be on your AI blue sky wish list of things you'd like to have? And we had all these ideas. And then we said, all right, which ones are the most impactful, the easiest to implement on the grid? And we came up with one that was, it's a combination of a couple ideas. One is, how do we utilize AI to better measure what we're already doing from a communication standpoint? And then the other solve there is, how do we measure the effectiveness we're getting because we're leveraging AI? So kind of trying to answer both those questions. The things we're focused on right now are some of the things tying in, trying to link things up. So with Sam Stark's help as an example, we built a workflow in Copilot that connects to Factiva, and we're able to use it for from a crisis communication standpoint, but also be able to do some of the media tracking. And then we're working on building out some other things as well. Some of the companies we're talking to now. So Reuter Finn is our new PR agency, and they connect us with a firm called Talkwalker. We're talking with Sam Stark, NewsWhip, and then we're talking with someone else on Bluefin. So I don't have a specific answer other than right now it seems like there's a bunch of tools out there, and we're trying to utilize them as much as we can. But I think we're going to have, as this quarter advances, the team's doing a lot of really good work. I think we'll have more to share.
Excited to hear about it when you can share, Paul. Thank you. And thanks for the questions, Suki. Thank you all for the questions. These are wonderful. So we have a few more minutes. I'm going to try to move through as many of these as we can in that time. So Laura Brown, very excited to see you speak at IPR Bridge Conference, Laura. Thank you for your question. She said, would love your thoughts about the ways we PR educators can help aspiring professionals for success in this AI era. Paul, would you like to? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so it's a timely question because when I was down at the Reagan conference, my daughter, who's a communication student in college, asked me that exactly for their news gathering site. I think it's experimenting with the tools. So a lot of what I've been talking about, I think it is trying to build a GPT, right? And we can talk about how to do that, but I think it's getting in there, not just asking AI a question, but trying to think more strategically, build a GPT or a project in Claude, those types of things. I think for the educators, it's what I've heard is you've got some that are not encouraging students to use AI, and some that are. I think you really need to be encouraging the students to use AI, not to cheat on things, but to utilize it in the way that they're going to utilize it once they get into the workforce. I think that's key. Again, the Ethan Mollick book, he talks about this and ways that educators can do that, him being one himself. So I think that'd be my answer.
Thank you, Paul. And then to add to that, Laura, I do think that this is a competency, of course, that incoming professionals will need as we see the industry sort of shift toward using these tools. One thing that we asked in the research that will be in the final report is we asked how many communicators currently are writing AI as a requirement into their job listings. So that might be an interesting data point for you to see to sort of also help you dial in where to help this next era of professionals. Thank you for your question. Let's see. Okay. Just kind of working way down the list. Kim asked, I'm interested in the governance space. What processes are in place for verification? What I see is a demand for more senior counsel and senior eyes on content generated by Gen AI. How are we using governance and review to support emerging professionals on how to discern whether content is correct, appropriate, and not violating confidentiality?
Yeah, and I think this is one where I'll steal the idea from Sam Stark. She's talked about it, right? You've got AI tools, you've got GPTs. the same way you've got humans and colleagues that you work with. And sometimes the humans and the colleagues can make a mistake or they can get something wrong, and you'll test it, you trust and verify. I think it's the same thing with AI. One of the things that we're focused on is how do we future-proof the entry-level roles so that you don't just give entry-level work to AI, but how do you equip? This goes back to the kind of the governance and the orientation. How do you equip new hires to coexist with AI? And then the important thing is how do you share the critical thinking that a lot of the folks on this webinar are bring with individuals so that they can look at what AI generates, review it, ask the right questions, and go back and understand how to do that. I think that's essential.
Absolutely. Very smart perspective. Thank you, Paul. And then we have a comment and a question sort of from Christian in the chat, who said that his organization rolled out Copilot to about a quarter of their end user population last year. Adoption rate suggests they are at average around 86%. They're working toward establishing an AI council, however, struggling to really define best steps to get it going, while also showing their C-suite the ROI of having this AI council. They want to introduce this as a value add to their organization versus just doing something to quote unquote check the box. Any ideas? So do you
Yeah,
have
I
any?
think from talking to other folks, Kay Cronin, who was Moderna at the time, was the one that told me and now we've got it in New York Life, an enterprise dashboard, so you can see across the organization how often are people utilizing chat gpt, and I think and copilot as well. So you can see the utilization. I think part of it is Sam encouraged us to do the survey, so we're able to talk about the time saved. We're able to talk about additional projects individuals are able to take on. We expect that there's going to be a need for more quantification of that. So then get very specific, Paul. Tell me that your team, give me a list of all the additional projects you were able to do as a result of this. So we think we're going to have more of that expected in the future, and trying to gather that. And we hope through the work of Metrics Plus, we're going to be able to automate some of that to demonstrate the value provided. I will say with Copilot, that's one where if you got it earlier and then you haven't come back to it because it wasn't as functional, it's gotten really good. And that's one, as a team, we're really focused on getting more of our team members to utilize, and not just typing it up, but also the audio. If you use it on the phone, the audio, finding emails, finding specific things, files on OneDrive, it's incredible.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll add to that. So, Christian, because you did mention Copilot and we're talking about the tool stack or the tech stack, we did ask specific questions in the report about where communicators are getting these tools. Are they in-house? Are they external? Are they a mixture of both? Which tools are being used? So we do have a list of tools and sort of where they're coming from in the report. So those insights are in there in case any of you are interested. I just didn't cover them today. And then to Paul's point, too, we did find in the research, Christian, that you should be measuring and also checking back. So that whole point that Paul mentioned about sort of like checking in over time and seeing how that evolves moving forward, that's another way as you're sort of evaluating and learning how to measure this within your organization, making sure that you're setting up time-based touch points to go back to your C-suite with and say, hey, this is how this is developed. This is how we're getting better, and XYZ. Thank you so much for your questions. All right. I think we are about at time, but I just want to take the opportunity again to thank you all for your interest, for attending today's webinar. Major thank you to Paul and his support, not only as an IPR trustee, but also as the sponsor for this report and a wonderful partner. You all are doing amazing things at New York Life, and we love hearing from you. And also to all of our wonderful contributors in the report itself. You can hear more from them and learn more on these insights as it goes live tomorrow. So thank you all. It's great to talk with you all today.